Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Chagigah. Today this is our second lesson in this Masechet, and we are going to review Daf 7 through Daf 13. Before we begin, I was asked to post about a special program that is happening this Sunday night in preparation for Masechet Yevamot, which is the next Masechet. In that Masechet, we're going to be talking about this concept of Chalitza. And on this Sunday night, there's going to be a special event where Rabbi Gidon Rothstein is going to give a halachic overview of Chalitza, and there's going to be a special guest speaker. So I was just asked to share that information with you. And in the chat, I put in the link to that special event. Okay, let's begin our review. We are going to begin with Daf 7, Daf Zayin, and here we have a very famous Braita. The Braita talks about Dvarim she'ein lahem shi'ur, things that do not have any limit. And these are things that have to do with charity, having to do with doing good things for others, learning Torah. And one of the things listed is what's called re'ayon. Re'ayon is from the word re'iyah, to see, and that is what we've discussed previously, which is to see Jerusalem, meaning there is no limit as to how many times you can go up to Jerusalem to the temple. So the Gemara tells us that not only is there no limit, but there's no limit in bringing, when you come to Jerusalem, in bringing the different sacrifices. It seems that there is a minimum that the sages have taught. Again, there's a machloket if this is about coming to Jerusalem or bringing the sacrifices when one comes to Jerusalem. So the Gemara tells us on Daf 7 that on the first day of the festival, when you go to Jerusalem, you must bring a korban, a sacrifice. And if you bring that sacrifice on the second day, it is still accepted. So we're going to see that you are supposed to bring these sacrifices on the first day of the festival, but if not, you can bring it on the subsequent days of the festival. If you didn't bring the sacrifice at all, then maybe you might not need to bring a sacrifice every time you come, and that is actually a machloket. The Gemara tells us that you cannot come empty-handed, to God's house. So it seems like interesting, right? We shouldn't go empty-handed when we visit, our friend's house. So much more so we don't come empty-handed when going to God's house. And therefore, you need to bring a sacrifice. The Gemara talks about what sacrifice should you bring. Maybe the best one is called the Olah. Again, the burnt offering, which is completely burnt. And the Gemara describes, right, it's completely given to God's table. What is God's table? The altar that is in the temple. The Gemara then suggests maybe the only obligation is if you're visiting the temple on a festival, but maybe if you visit the temple during the year, maybe there isn't an obligation to bring a sacrifice. Or, as we said before, every time you come to the temple, you should bring a sacrifice as the polite thing to do. The Gemara tells us again, you can come to the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, as much as you want. And again, maybe there's no limit. Maybe there's also no limit in the numbers of sacrifices that you bring when you come to the temple. Okay, the Mishnah on Daf 7 tells us that, again, as we mentioned in the last week, there are different sacrifices that were brought for the holiday. Number one is the Olah, the burnt offering. That's completely for God. The Gemara says that the money that you use to buy this sacrifice needs to come from what's called in Hebrew chulin, meaning regular mundane money, right? The money in that you have in your house. But um, the shlamim, meaning the peace offering, that you can use money that was set aside as maser sheni, that is a tithe. We've mentioned before, there are certain years where your tithe goes, sometimes it goes to the poor. On certain years, the tithe is called maser sheni, where you take the money with you to Jerusalem and then you buy food there and you sit and you eat in Jerusalem. Because it's something that you're going to be eating, the Mishnah tells us that you can buy your sacrifice with that money. So again, we have two types of peace offerings of shlamim. One is the Chagigah, right? Again, we talked about it last week. The name of our Masechet is based on this sacrifice. So the festival peace offering, the festival shlamim. Beit Shammai says it has to come from regular money. Beit Hillel say you can use your maaser sheni money, your tithed money. The shlamei simcha, that is the sacrifice that's brought in order to again have a lot of meat on the festival. And here, this also can come from money that was pledged previously for a different sacrifice. So that would be okay to use that money for the shlamei simcha. Okay, the Gemara tells us that anything you have an obligation to bring must be brought from regular money, right? Mundane money. If you have an obligation, let's say you sinned inadvertently and you need to bring a sin offering, that the money that you use to buy that offering must be your own money, not something that you promised to bring in another time. Beit Shammai says that you can't bring the olah on the first day of the festival. Beit Hillel says that you can. The same thing, Beit Shammai says that the olat re'iyah, the burnt offering that we bring when we come to Jerusalem, can be brought on the festival, again from mundane money. Okay, Daf 8 talks about what about supplementing or maybe combining regular money and money that I've already set aside to use for the Maser Sheni, for the tithe. Can you combine the money? If the answer is yes, the question then becomes, what does it mean to combine the money? So one opinion is that the first animal must be from chulin, from regular money, and all the other subsequent animals can be from the Maser Sheni money. Or maybe you combine the two types of money and buy the first animal, and that would be okay, meaning you can combine it even in that first animal. The Gemara continues on Daf 8 and tells us that you can bring your Maaser Behima, right? Maaser Behima is a tithe that one needs to make on their animals. Every 10th animal needs to be brought to the temple. So the Gemara says that animal can be brought on Chol HaMoed, meaning on the festival, but not on the festival itself, meaning not on the first day. Because again, you can't separate out this animal on the festival. Because why? When the way they used to separate these animals was they would take let's say their sheep, and they would slowly let them out of the corral, and they would count 1, 2, 3, 4, right? When they got to 10, the 10th animal they would mark with a red dye, and that 10th animal would then later be brought to Jerusalem. So the Gemara explains on Daf 8 that you can't do this process on the festival because you're marking the animal. Therefore, you can't bring this sacrifice on the festival itself. Okay, the next idea in the Gemara talks about the korban simcha. Again, this was for there would be a lot of meat. The Gemara says you can use any animal, but you cannot use a bird or a mincha, meaning a grain offering, because this sacrifice can't be with grain or birds. It needs to be an animal, right? Again, here it seems that the Gemara understands, or at least, sorry for any vegetarians, but according to the Gemara, right, simcha means meat. And therefore, it doesn't mean having a good cracker or a piece of bread or having a good piece of chicken. And therefore, the sacrifice of the simcha needs to be an animal sacrifice. The next Mishnah on Daf 8 tells us that if you have a lot of family members that come with you to Jerusalem, again, we want to make sure that everybody has meat to eat. So you're going to spend a lot of money on the Korban Chagigah and the Korban Simcha, and less money on the Olah Re'iyah, right? Again, the Olah, the burnt offering, is going completely to God. That doesn't help you for your holiday meal. So therefore, the Gemara says that if you have the Mishnah says that if you have a lot of family members and not a lot of money, so then you bring a lot of the shlamim and less of the olot, again, because you're not going to partake from the olot. If you have a lot of money and not a lot of family members, you bring a lot of the olot, right? Because that's all going to God, and less of the shlamim. And then again, the reverse is if you have a little money and not a lot of family members, so then you bring the minimum amount. And if you have a lot of money and a lot of family members, you bring a lot of both, right? So again, depending on your needs what will depend on what korban what sacrifice you're going to bring to Yerushalayim. So the Gemara again here talks about combining the two types of money, as we mentioned before. And the Gemara says that let's say I have 10 animals that are going to be the Chagigah animals. Again, it's going to be part of my meal. Again, part of it goes to the Kohanim, to the priests, and part of it the people are going to eat. So if let's say you have 10 of these animals, you can bring 5 on the first day, and then you can bring 5 on the next day. Or right, maybe you cannot break it up, and you need to bring all 10 animals at the same time. But let's say you started bringing the animals in the afternoon and you ran out of time, then you can bring the 5 animals on the next day. Daf number 9, we have a Mishnah that tells us that if you didn't bring the sacrifices on the first day, you can bring them every day, every other day of the festival, including Shmini Atzeret. So just to remind us, this is a little bit of a flashback to Masechet Sukkah, where we discussed the identity of the festival, right? Sukkot is 7 days, and the 8th day is a special holiday called Shmini Atzeret. And it seems to be a separate holiday linked to Sukkot, but a separate holiday. So the Gemara tells us that if let's say you couldn't bring the sacrifice on any other day, you can even bring it on Shmini Atzeret. But if you missed Shmini Atzeret, now you can't bring it anymore. And if you hold on one second. Here the Gemara talks about things that are kind of crooked, like that you did wrong. The Mishnah gives another example, that if you, let's say, the Mishnah is talking about things that, let's say, you either missed an opportunity or you did something wrong and you can't correct it. So if you, let's say, again, back to our sacrifice, if you missed the first day, you can correct it every other day of Sukkot. Once Sukkot is over, you cannot correct it. So the Mishnah adds, again, in very famously Mishnah style, which means bringing in different examples from completely or seemingly unrelated topics. So the Gemara says that if you have relations with someone who is forbidden to you, and then you have the child of that relationship becomes a mamzer, meaning illegitimate, but in the halachic sense, in the Jewish law sense, you can't fix that situation. There's nothing you can do. Or right, someone who is learned that leaves their Torah study. Also, there's nothing you can do about that situation. The Gemara is going to explain what this means in a minute. First, let's go back to our sacrifice. We said that the last day of Sukkot is considered part of Sukkot, so to the last day of Pesach is also part of Pesach, and therefore all the days of the festival are seen as days that you can make up for the days that you missed previously. The Gemara says that it says in the Torah that you have to celebrate for 7 days. What does it mean to celebrate for 7 days? You're supposed to bring the sacrifice of celebration, right, the Chagigah, on the first day. But if you didn't, you can make it up all, in any one of the 7 days. Here now we have a discussion in the Gemara. What does it mean to make up, right? Does it mean that you have the first day, and if you didn't do it, then every other day is like a do-over or a next chance to make up? Or is each day a makeup for the previous day, meaning you were supposed to bring on day 1, you didn't, so now it's day 2. Day 2 is makeup for day 1, or is day 2 a new opportunity to bring the sacrifice, and so on and so forth. And the practical application is, what if someone wasn't obligated to bring the sacrifice on the first day? Let's say they were sick, they weren't feeling well, they're not obligated on the first day. If every day is connected to the first day, if you weren't obligated on the first day, now you don't have to make it up the rest of the time because you weren't obligated. But if we say that each day is independent, then every day, right, day 2, day 3, day 4, if let's say you got better on day 3, now all of a sudden does the obligation kick in? And now do you have to bring that sacrifice? So that's what the Gemara here is discussing on Daf 9. The Gemara then goes on to a conversation about other things that one day is connected to the other. Are they intrinsically linked, or are they separate entities in and of itself? We have this in the world of tum'ah, in the world of impurity and purity. We also have it in the world of what's called ziva, which is emissions, either seminal emissions for a male or bleeding for a woman on certain days of the month. And here the Gemara talks about, right, each day, is it a separate entity or are they intrinsically linked? So as we discussed in the Mishnah, we said something that's twisted or crooked and can't be straightened. So the Gemara gives other examples. What is this? Right? Someone who didn't daven, who didn't pray, or didn't say Shema, or was counted to join in a mitzvah, and then he didn't join them. Right? These are what we would call missed opportunities. Right? You had an opportunity to do something, and you missed it. And once you miss that opportunity, that's it. You can't go back and fix it. You've missed that opportunity. So the Gemara, I think, here is trying to impress upon us, right, to take advantage of opportunities when we are faced with them, right? Don't say, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, right? The Gemara is saying, right, as we learned in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of Our Fathers, right, why wait till tomorrow when you can do it today? Right? Right? If you don't do it now, when are you going to do it? So I think here the Gemara is discussing this idea of making sure we do things on time or at the earliest opportunity. The Gemara also, since we're talking about ways to fulfill opportunities, the Gemara talks about reviewing our learning, right? So that's why we're doing a review now. So the Gemara says, Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to this number yet, but the Gemara says that one must review their learning 101 times. So feel free to download the shir and listen to it over and over again, but you don't really have to. But right, the Gemara says that if you review your learning 101 times, then you're called an Eved Hashem, right? A true servant of God, right? There's something about reviewing your learning that brings you up to a higher level. Here, the Gemara continues and talks about God refining the Jewish people with poverty, seemingly, right? Again, if you look around, I think here the Gemara is trying to understand, right? You see many righteous people who are quite poor, and the Gemara wants to understand why are there so many people that are poor, and the Gemara says, it's in the plan, right? God makes us better through poverty. The Gemara says that, right, if you steal something, you only need to return it, right? That's how I make it up. But if you sleep, excuse me, right, going back to the Mishnah, right, it's saying, right, if you steal something, so you can return it, right? That's something you can correct. However, if you have relations with a married woman and now she becomes prohibited to her husband, now there's no way to fix this, right? This is right what the Mishnah was talking about, something that's crooked, right? We did something wrong and we can't fix it. The Gemara continues on Daf 10, talking about. Okay, we get to the next Mishnah. Okay, so the next Mishnah is going to start an interesting discussion about different laws. We know, as we've been learning Gemara for some time, that laws are based on verses in the Torah, right, in the Bible. Sometimes things are very clear. Sometimes things are less clear. So our Mishnah now is going to bring up certain topics that seem to be loosely connected to verses in the Torah, but the sages explain to us what these laws are really about. So the Gemara says that releasing someone from a vow, right? If someone takes a vow, you can be released from that vow in a certain way, either by standing in front of 3 people and they release you from that vow. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says that does not have any sources in the written text, and that is completely based on oral law. The laws of Shabbat and Chagigah, right? That's why it's brought here, right? The laws of this, the sacrifice of the Chagigah, and Mi'ilah. Mi'ilah is when someone steals from God. We'll discuss that in a minute. So those 3 things have very few biblical sources and many oral laws. And the Mishnah says that these are like mountains that are hanging by a thread, right? Again, the mountain is the number of laws that we really have, and that thread is connecting it to one, seemingly minor or limited verse in the Torah. The Gemara is going to explain all of these things. The next list of things, right? Monetary laws, the laws of the sacrifices, purity and impurity, and forbidden relationships. All of these things have many sources in the Torah, and these are fundamental concepts in Judaism. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to go through each one of these things. So the Gemara tells us that there are different biblical sources for releasing someone from a vow. So how could the Mishnah say there's no source? So the Gemara basically limits this statement to a specific thing, basically that a person can release someone from a vow, but not God, number one. And we also learn that one can take a vow to fulfill a commandment, a mitzvah, right? I might think I can take a vow that I'm never going to eat chocolate again. I would not take that vow, but let's pretend, right? So the Gemara says not only that, but I can actually say I'm going to take a vow to daven every day, to keep Shabbat every week, right? I might think that you can't do it, but the Gemara tells us no, you actually can take this. You can take this vow, and in order to encourage you to do the commandment. Okay, let's talk about Shabbat, right? What does it mean that Shabbat has limited sources but many different laws, right? We know that there are a lot of verses that talk about Shabbat. So the Gemara says, no. What are we talking about? We're talking about something very particular. We're talking about when I do an action that is seemingly prohibited, but I'm doing it when I don't need that actual action. So the classic example for this is I'm not allowed to dig a hole, right? Because digging a hole is part of the planting process, right? I need a hole to put my seed in. But what if I dig a hole because I need the dirt? Right? I'm not digging the hole because I need the hole. The prohibited action is really digging a hole because of the hole. So therefore, if I dig a hole because I need the dirt, that would not be, let's say, violating the letter of the law of digging. Right? You would be patur, you would be exempt. You're still not supposed to do it, but you would be exempt. And that is not based on a verse. Or another option is when we do something that is, again, seemingly prohibited, but I'm doing it to be destructive as opposed to being constructive, right? When we learned in Masechet Shabbat about the laws of Shabbat, the melachot, the actions, the actions are in their essence productive. Even if I'm talking about breaking down a wall, right? That is prohibited, but it's only prohibited if I'm breaking it down because I want to build it up, right? Everything needs to be productive. If I'm only being destructive, that would not be a violation of the laws of Shabbat. Okay, so all of these things are mountains that are suspended by a hair or a thread. The next thing we mentioned is the Chagigah. Again, we've been talking about the Chagigah already for a week. So the Gemara says that it's not clear from the verse what that it means to bring a sacrifice, right? It says, "V'samachta bechagecha." One needs to be happy in their when it's the festival. It talks about going up to Jerusalem. None of these verses clarify that it means to bring a sacrifice, and therefore we learn that the word chag. The word festival connotes also bringing a sacrifice, but that's again learned out. So that's our mountain that's attached by a thread. The last thing in this section was me'ilah. Me'ilah means using something that is sanctified to God. And if you use it, it's viewed as stealing. And normally when you do this, right, so if someone, so one second. So normally when you do, let's say there's something that's sanctified to God, meaning you say, this cup is going to go to the temple. And then I say, oh, but I really like this cup. I want to use it. I'm not allowed to use it because I've already sanctified it for the temple. What's the temple going to do with it? They're going to sell it and use the money for upkeep of the temple. If I use it by accident, then the law is that I have to pay back the value of this item, plus I add a fifth, and I bring a sacrifice in atonement for what I've done. Uh, Here, the Gemara says that there's a very specific case that's not so clear. And here we're going to talk about someone who sends a messenger to do something for them. We haven't really learned this concept yet, but in Jewish law, if I send a messenger to do something for me, that messenger is seen as an extension of myself. As long as they follow the directions, right? So if I send someone to go to the market to buy something for me, they are an extension of me. So the Gemara at the bottom of Daf 10 tells us that if you send someone to basically buy something for them in the marketplace, but you gave them money that was set aside for the temple, so that's called mi'ilah. If the messenger follows your directions explicitly, meaning exactly what you said, then who is liable for mi'ilah? So it's the person who sent the messenger, because you're the one who gave the instructions. If the messenger doesn't follow the rules, right, and doesn't follow the instructions and decides, right, you told the person to buy apples and they buy oranges. So they didn't follow the instructions. So then the messenger is the one who's liable for mi'ilah and not the person who was sent. Um, and therefore, again, this becomes something that is learnt through oral law. And again, this is the mountain that is suspended by a thread. Okay. Next, we talked about other laws and where are the sources, right? So let's say monetary laws. The Gemara says there are many verses, but they're still not clear, and we always need the oral law to explain these verses, even if there are a lot of verses, right? So the very famous one, it says that if you accidentally cause the death of a fetus, right? So it says nefesh tachat nefesh, right? You caused a death. So then the translation of the verse is you deserve to die. We know that you are not put to death for this case. Rather, you must pay the damages based on the value of that life, right? So nefesh tachat nefesh, right? A life for a life doesn't really mean literally. Rather, it is figuratively, right? And therefore, I think here the Gemara is explaining that we always need the oral law to explain the verses, right? Even when we think that they seem very clear, right? It says ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, right? In the times of, right, in Code of Hammurabi, if you poked out someone's eye, they would poke out your eye, meaning that's what the Bible says, an eye for an eye, right? We don't believe that. Right, our tradition, the oral law tells us if you cause damage, if you poke out someone's eye, you need to cover the value of that eye, right? And it's not that your eye is poked out. So here, the Gemara on Daf 11 explains what it means, and seemingly, right, again, seemingly clear verses are actually explained in a deeper way in the oral tradition. The same thing with the avodah, the worship in the temple. There are many verses that talk about how this is done. However, the oral law explains the details of this worship. The same thing with purity and impurity, right? The idea of how big a mikvah is learned from the oral law and not from the written law. The same thing with, again, right, purity and with impurity as well. The size of things that are become impure. And the same thing with forbidden relationships. All of these things are learned from the oral law, and this chapter ends by telling us that all of these are fundamental concepts to Judaism. There's not one over the other, rather, all of them are fundamental concepts in Judaism. And with that, we finish the first chapter in Masechet Chagigah. Okay, the next chapter, just as a brief introduction, discusses numerous esoterical concepts. I will try to explain as much as possible, but really there's a lot of depth here that we don't really understand. There's mysticism, there's Kabbalah, so there's a lot here. So I'm going to try my best to explain as much as possible, and we can continue delving deeper in the future. So the Mishnah on Daf 11 tells us that you cannot teach or learn, right? We'll see in the Gemara, the verses that talk about illicit relationships with three people, right? It seems that you need to do it with a smaller group so you can focus on each student. You're not allowed to learn the chapters of the creation of the world, right, in Breshit with two people, and you cannot learn Maaseh Merkava, which is the first chapter of Yechezkel, which talks about, right, Yechezkel has a vision of what God looks like, or the angels, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. So you can't even learn it with one person because we're very concerned about these topics. They're very deep and conceptual and hard to transmit the information. The Gemara says that there are certain things that if you analyze them, it's not good. What are these things? What's above and what's below, what's before and what's after. So again, very confusing. The Gemara is going to explain this. The Mishnah continues, and anyone who has no concern for the honor of God shouldn't have come into this world. So there's a lot here. The Gemara is going to explain some of these concepts. So the Gemara tells us that you can't teach. It's not that you can't learn it, but you can't teach it to three students or two or one, depending on the concept. Why? Because you won't ask questions. Maybe you'll be embarrassed. And these are things maybe like Masemer Kava, godly things. These things need to be understood by themselves. They can't be transmitted because of the depths of these secrets. When we're talking about the forbidden relationships, there are many verses that imply that you shouldn't teach it to three students. Why? Again, the Gemara says that if you have if you have a class of three, so the teacher is going to talk to one person, and the other two people are going to talk to each other and miss the lesson. And if you miss the lesson, you miss the point, and that is very dangerous. Maaseh Breshit, the creation of the world. You can teach it to one person, but not to two, because again, we want to make sure that the transmission of these concepts is direct. You can't ask what existed before creation. That is kind of none of our business, as you would say, right? We can't understand it. And we can't ask what's beyond this world, right? What's coming afterwards. Daf 12 now starts talking about, since we're talking about creation, Daf 12 tells us that Adam, that man, was so tall that, he went from, right, his feet were on the land and his head was in the sky. But after the sin, he was, right, diminished. So one idea could be that we're talking about, right, maybe physically, maybe more intellectually, right? Mankind was all-knowing maybe beforehand, and after the sin, we were diminished, our intellect, our capacity to understand things. Maybe man was wide, right, from one end to the earth to the other. Again, in those days, maybe they thought the earth was square, So, right, one end to the other. It doesn't work when the earth is round. But, right, the Gemara says, no, 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 this is the same thing, right? Man was so great, and then he was diminished after the sin. From here, the Gemara tells us on Daf 12, there were 10 things that were created on the first day. So again, this seems to be fundamental things of creation, heaven and earth, tohu vavohu. We'll see what that is in a minute. Light and dark, wind and water, day and night. So again, these seem to be like opposites. One explanation is it's like the four elements, right? Like earth, wind, air, fire, and time, right? Time, space. So all of these things are fundamental to creation. The Gemara talks about the light, right? Again, the first day of creation, God creates light, right? Vayhi or. But how could that be if we know that the sun was only created on the fourth day? So the Gemara says that the first day, that light was a special light. It was a divine light that was very bright, and it was hidden for the future for the righteous people in the future. Or the light was regular light, and it was created on the first day, but the sun was only suspended in the sky on the fourth day. From here, the Gemara tells us 10 attributes to create the world: wisdom, understanding, knowledge, strength, might, righteousness, justice, kindness, mercy, right? All of these things are, again, fundamental characteristics that make the world go round. I read a note that they might correlate to the 10 sfirot. So if those of you are familiar with Kabbalah, in Kabbalah, there's the idea that there are 10 emanations that connect us to God. Each one of these emanations is called a sphira, an emanation. And maybe these 10 attributes correspond to the 10 sfirot. Here, the Gemara says that the world, when it was created, was like a ball of yarn that fell on the floor, and it kept rolling and rolling. This might be, right, the law of entropy, right, that the world was expanding till God said, stop, you need to, wait and stop, right, and from here, the Gemara says, right, God's name is Shaddai or Shakai, we don't say the name, right? But it's She-Dai, right? The God who said, what Dai means enough, right? Like in Dayenu on Pesach, right? God said enough, world, don't expand anymore. Here, there's a beautiful machloket. This could be a shir in and of itself. There's a machloket of what was created first, the heaven or the earth, right? And here, very beautifully, it's a machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and this, I think, really sums up their philosophies to Judaism, right? Beit Shammai says the heavens were created first, right? Again, spirituality, God, right? It all comes down, right? Top down. Beit Shammai is very stringent, very letter of the law. Beit Hillel says, no, the land was created first, right? Beit Hillel says, why did God create the world? Because of mankind, right? Because he wanted man to be in the world. So again, right, what is the foundation? Heaven or earth? So I thought that was just a beautiful idea. Since we're talking about the heavens, the Gemara asks, what is Shamayim, right? Shamayim means heaven. Sham Mayim, there's water there. Or it means Eish Mayim, right? What is in the heavens? Fire and water, right? Again, things that don't normally come together. God put them together. From here, since we're talking about what the world was founded on, the Gemara tells us that on Daf 12, that the land, right, the earth stands on pillars, right? Again, this reminds us again of Pirkei Avot, ethics of our fathers, right? That the world stands on three pillars: Torah, Avodah, Gmilut Chasadim, right? Work, right? Torah, work, and doing kindness to others. Right, the world stands on these pillars. The pillar stands on water. Again, water is a symbol for Torah. The water stands on the mountains. What's mountains? The scholars, the teachers, right? They ground us. These mountains are suspended on wind. What's wind? Maybe divine inspiration, prophecy, maybe. Then there's a storm again, and all of this is held up by God, right? So again, a beautiful metaphor to what the world is based on, right? Is the world based on 12 pillars, like the Jewish people, 7 pillars, 1 pillar? What would be that 1 pillar? The Gemara says righteous people, right? The right, the tzaddik, that is the 1 pillar that suspends the entire world. From here, the Gemara talks about the heavens being, there are 7 heavens, and, 7 heavens. There are 7 heavens, says the Gemara, and it goes through each name of the different heavens and what is the purpose of each one of these heavens. There's a place for a Jerusalem in the sky, again with God. There's a place where the angels live and where they praise God. And here the Gemara talks about praising God. The angels praise God at night. Therefore, when Jewish people learn at night, they have a special merit. There's a place in the heavens where all the weather is stored, right? The storms and the snow and the hail. And there's a place, the highest level is called the Aravot, the fields. And that is where blessing is stored and kindness, where the souls are stored as well. And there are also different types of angels. And there is God's throne. And God is surrounded by darkness and like clouds. And basically, one idea is that each one of these heavens is a level of spirituality that we're meant to ascend, right? We're meant to try to get closer to God. The Gemara on Daf 13 tells us there's another heaven above this, but that we can't speak about, right? That's already going too far. Right? The Gemara says that Nebuchadnezzar said that he wanted to make himself like a god, but then a divine voice came out and said, you think you can be like God? God is hundreds of years, like, the distance is so far, right? It would take you 500 years to cross each one of the heavens, and there are 7 of them, so it's basically impossible for you to reach God. From here, the Gemara talks about Ma'aseh Merkava. Again, as we mentioned, the first chapter of Yechezkel describes, again, the chariots, right? Merkava means chariot, so it describes the chariot of God. These are things that you're not allowed to teach. Interestingly enough, the Gemara proceeds to teach it. So that's interesting. But again, maybe the idea is we're just going to learn it very superficially. And when we're talking about teaching, we mean, in depth. So the Gemara talks about what does this look like? First of all, you're not allowed to teach it to somebody who's young. You have someone who must have these 5 characteristics in order to learn it. You cannot teach this. You cannot teach Torah to a non-Jew. In this chapter, the word chashmal is mentioned, which is fascinating. Chashmal in Hebrew means electricity. I just wanted to remind everybody that in the time of Yechezkel, there was no electricity. So it's interesting that the word chashmal is there. Maybe it means like lightning. But here the Gemara says that if you try to contemplate what the word means, again, it's some divine characteristic or electricity. The Gemara gives stories of people who tried to think about what it was, and a fire came out and burnt them up. So very dangerous. Or chashmal is a name of divine animals that were made out of fire. And from here, the Gemara tries to explain different, not tries, it explains different verses from this chapter. Talks again about fire and lightning. There's an angel that stands on the earth and his head is in the heavens. He's called Sandalbon, Sandalphon. Um, and he makes crowns for God. So again, very spiritual verses. God is the king, right? Here it says that God is the king over all the kings, right? We say in Az Yashir, right? Ashira la Hashem ki ga'o ga'a, right? We praise God because he has risen over the exalted one, right? He's exalted over the exalted ones, right? So he's a king over all the kings. What does that mean? Right, the kings of the jungle, the lion, right, the king of the sky, which is the eagle, the king in the world, right, mankind, and he is the king of kings, basically. From here, Yechezkel describes, he sees different faces on the throne or on the chariot of God. There are four different sides, and each one has a different face. There's the face of a person, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. Or maybe instead of the ox, there's also the face of a kruv, a cherub. So the Gemara asks, what's this cherub? It's the face of a child. Here you see, right, again, there's the cherub here in the sky, in heaven, and, right, we have in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, on top of the ark, on top of the Aron, we have the kruvim, right, the cherubs that are on top. So again, there's this connection between heaven and earth. From here, Yechezkel describes the angels, and he says he sees the angels. They have 6 wings and 4 faces, right? Those are the 4 faces. There's another explanation, another vision in another prophecy that angels had 4 wings. So it seems the Gemara explains that after the destruction of the temple, the angels lost 2 of their wings. Why do they need 6 wings? 2 wings cover their body, 2 wings cover their legs, and 2 wings are to fly. Also, the legs of the angels were basically like stuck together, right? Or they had straight legs, right? This is one of the reasons that when we pray, right, the Shmona Esrei, we keep our legs together because we want to emulate the angels. The Gemara says that there are thousands upon thousands of angels, and there's a river that flows forth from the perspiration of these divine animals, the Chayot HaKodesh. The question is, where does this river go? One opinion is that this river is a bad river, right? It's a curse, and therefore it flows onto evil people. Another explanation is that it's actually at the top of 14, it's actually a blessing, and it flows onto the heads of the humble Torah scholars. So either way, we have a very clear, not clear, a very vivid description of what the chariot of God looks like. We are going to continue with this description next week. And with that, I wish everybody a great week, a Shavua Tov, and we will continue our learning next week at our regular time. So wishing everybody a Shavua Tov.
Thank you.
My pleasure.